Hi everyone, I'm Fumihiro Kanei from NTT in Japan. I'm going to present our work analyzing the use of public and in-house secure development guidelines in US and Japanese industries. Let's get started with the background. Secure development guidelines are a document that systematically describe the implementation methods to improve software security. In addition to the public guidelines that anyone can refer to on the web, there are in-house guidelines that the companies have established on their own. These guidelines contribute to improving software security by making developers aware of the risks to be assumed, the necessary security measures, and how to implement them. In recent years, some existing studies have focused on secure development guidelines and conducted surveys on developers' perception of the guidelines. Although these studies have provided insight into designing and using guidelines more efficiently, we are concerned about the gaps between academic research and actual industrial settings. For example, most existing studies have focused only on public guidelines, and in-house guidelines have not been well studied. Also, national differences in developers' perception of the secure development guidelines are not studied. In addition, some existing studies recommended some practices for developers to implement guidelines efficiently, but the actionability of these practices have not been verified in industrial settings. This table shows recommended practices for implementing guidelines efficiently. For example, checking compliance with guidelines during quality assurance is recommended in existing research, but whether this is easy for developers to put into practice has not been verified. Considering this background, we ask 5 research questions regarding the type of guidelines used in industry and its utilization, the usability of guidelines and actionability of recommended practices, and the differences between the US and Japan. To answer these questions, we conducted an online survey of software development professionals in the industry. This figure shows the overview of our methodology. Our survey is composed of questions about secure development guidelines, characteristics of development project, and participant demographics. In total, we recruited 870 software development professionals in the US and Japan. This table shows questions about secure development guidelines. We ask 5 categories of questions: type of guidelines they use, enforcement of compliance with the guidelines, frequency of reference to information source for secure development, the usability of guidelines, and actionability of recommended practices. To analyze the factor affecting developers' perception and utilization of guidelines, we also asked participants questions about development characteristics such as development experience, size of organization, and contractual relationship. This slide shows the procedure of our analysis. First, we grouped the survey response by the type of guidelines and compared the result of the questions about secure development guidelines to answer research question 1 and research question 2. We also performed regression analysis to answer research question 3 and research question 4. Specifically, we investigate how the development characteristics affect the perceived usability of guidelines and the actionability of the recommended practices. Through this analysis, we compared the result between the US and Japan to answer research question 5. Let's move on to the result. This graph shows the percentage of participants who use only public guidelines, only in-house guidelines, and both. Although most existing studies have focused only on public guidelines, we found that in-house guidelines were more widely used in the industry. This table shows the percentage of participants who are mandated to comply with guidelines. We found that compliance with in-house guidelines tend to be more frequently mandated than compliance with public ones. In addition, the result of regression analysis shows that participants who use both public and in-house guidelines perceived the guideline to be more usable and some recommended practices to be more actionable. Given these observations, we assume some differences in the role and content of public and in-house guidelines. Specifically, we assume that public guidelines contained generalized information for secure development, and that in-house guidelines contain company-specific information that complement public guidelines. As a result of regression analysis for the actionability of recommended practices, we found some practices are difficult to implement for participants with certain attributes, such as participants in small projects and participants conducting contracted development. For example, while previous studies recommended that developers check compliance with guidelines in quality assurance, developers cannot conduct such checks because of a lack of human resource or decision-making authority. Given these results, we conclude that organizational issues have not been sufficiently considered in recommendations in existing studies, and lightweight practices to efficiently implement guidelines are needed. We found several differences in cognitive style between the US and Japan. For example, US participants with less development experience tended to answer optimistically, and participants with more experience were relatively conservative. This tendency was observed only in the US and not observed in Japan. Considering the above, we recommended researchers conduct comparative analysis between country or region with different software development situation and participants with different cognitive styles. In conclusion, we conducted an online survey regarding secure development guidelines. Our survey revealed the gaps between academic research and actual situation in industry, such as the widespread of in-house guidelines, low actionability of recommended practices, and differences in the cognitive styles between the US and Japan. The future work includes more detailed analysis of in-house secure development guidelines and consideration of lightweight strategy for efficiently implementing secure development guidelines. Thank you for attending our presentation, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions.